Welcome to Find the Connection, the podcast where we explore the history, development, events, and stories that make Northeast Florida so inviting. I'm your host, Kendra Robertson, a real estate professional, community leader, wellness ambassador, and proud resident of Jacksonville Beach for over 30 years. In each episode, we'll dive into the stories of the people that are making a difference, both at a local level and nationally. We'll share an inside look at real estate with tips for maintaining work-life balance, from winning your mornings to winning your day, all while staying connected with our vibrant local community. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's find the connection between community and living your best life. Thank you for joining me today. I have James Dupree, a local architect who was born and raised in Jacksonville. University of Virginia, correct?
I was actually born in Tampa, but I live in Jacksonville. Yeah.
Okay. We have known each other for quite a while, since before we had kids. Our kids were similar age, so we kept in contact because of all their activities. He is also a swimmer, swims in the ocean every morning, just like I do. So we have that in common as well. Although you have been swimming almost every day for years, right?
Right. Yeah, I grew up swimming, and I swam in high school and a couple of years of college at UVA. So it's been a long-standing habit.
So it's just the way you started your day for years, in a pool until recently, right?
Right. I kind of got tired of the chlorine. It's just true that, as you know, I lost a son to leukemia a couple of years ago. And so it feels better swimming in the ocean. I feel closer to him. We kind of communicate. We chat in the morning before I get in the water. So it's been a good thing.
I love that. I do love that. So I think when the kids were younger, everyone's always trying to figure out the education process. Your family was very involved in the Waldorf philosophy. So you got involved with the Seaside Play Garden, correct? Remind me?
Right. They were having classes, I guess you'll call it, but for just a small group of kids, about 8 kids, in Sharon Elliott's house. And they wanted to grow into more of a proper school. So they found a little house in Jacks Beach that was zoned properly. And I helped them, from an architect's perspective, get a permit to occupy the building. And we made sure that we reduced the lead counts in the old paint adequately. And we painted it up and did the life safety plan and got the electrical and plumbing, the backflow preventers and all that stuff done. So it was a successful thing. And my kids were there for a couple of years and before they moved on. But that institution, if you will, still chugging along, and it's grown. And I think there's 2 or 3 schools like it functioning now in the local area. Nice. So it's a successful thing.
We also, I manage the property where your office is, so I got to see you every day for
every day.
18 years.
Yeah.
But prior to you going out on your own, what?
Yeah, 18 years.
Yeah.
Boy, time flies.
I know. Prior to you going out on your own, you worked with Haskell, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So
for about 20 years.
What that involved?
I started out, I'd gotten a job for a year or so with a local architect, and then John Zona, who was the head of architecture and engineering, was hired, and my mother was a realtor and sold him a house, and we got to be friends, and he hired me at Haskell. Worked there for a long time, did a lot of different building types. The biggest ones were continuing care retirement communities like Fleet Landing. I didn't design Fleet Landing, but I designed 3 other ones. Those were the biggest projects.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
One DC, Northern California, and Huntsville, I think it was, Alabama. So they were big projects.
Well, it's funny, living at the beach, we're kind of in our own bubble.
Absolutely. Something I'm proud of.
I went into town for a friend's housewarming party, and I was talking with a guy that's involved in Leadership Jacks, which was a whole new thing. I knew of it, but didn't really know the ins and outs of it. Do you remember Michael Husky? I said, well, yeah, my friend Jimmy used to work for Haskell years ago. And he's like, he was one of the first projects I worked for. He was so excited.
That was one of those retirement communities in Northern Virginia, outside of DC. Yeah, he was a young kid. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
He's a good guy, though.
yeah, it was really
Yeah.
nice just talking to him about leadership jacks as well. So, what made you decide to go out on your own and leave Haskell? Were you starting to get,
Well, it's interesting. John Zoner, who I mentioned, his wife, sister, was married to a guy that was a son of a sorority sister of my mother. How about all of that? And they had a house, the Carters, who actually owned and developed Town Center, the old Skinner property.
the St. Johnstown Center?
Yeah, the big one.
Okay.
They wanted to do an addition to their house in Ponte Vedra, and John got me hooked up in that. And so I did some drawings and befriended a guy who was a contractor, and he had a project going up down the street. A car salesman wanted a exercise room, and I designed something. He said, "You know what, Jim? Let's just tear this house down and do another one." Well, this was all side work with Haskell's permission, so I designed an oceanfront house there. And so I had a kind of a side gig going. And then when we had our second boy, my wife, Michelle, was really struggling just keeping the lid on the pot. And so I decided just to break from Haskell and do the side work and be closer to home.
Wow.
And worked out. So I've been doing that ever since. And Miles was born in 2000, so pretty much since then.
So, you've done quite a few projects, like throughout the beaches. How far out do you do a project? Like
The beaches, I like to be able to ride my bicycle to them. That's
to the
my
job?
preference. I don't ride. I've done some Ponte Vedra houses, but I don't ride my bike that far. But Neptune Beach and Atlantic Beach are my favorite haunts. And I do at the beach. I just like the vibe, and it is a bubble, like you say.
Okay.
And so, and I have a little bit of a reputation within that bubble, so that's where I've done most of my work. I've done some stuff. I knew Jay McGarvey. I worked on a renovation of his house in Ponte Vedra, and he developed Sea Colony down in St. Augustine Beach. So I did some projects
Okay.
down there, sort of associated with him. And then I worked on a recent house on a horse farm outside St. Augustine. So a little
Okay.
bit of a stretch, but I'm a local guy.
With our Beaches Town Center tour of homes, it seems like you've always got a house on tour. So we had one of your houses, actually two of your houses this year on tour. One was brand
Yeah.
new on the ocean.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
Really
But
beautiful.
Oh,
Lots
thank
of
you.
compliments on that one.
Thank you. Yeah, that was I liked it, and I have a couple more in the works, two or three, on the ocean in AB. So I'm looking forward to continuing that thing.
How did you end up at University of Virginia? At, why'd you choose that school?
Well, first of all, I swam in high school, as I said, and Randy Reese was my coach, and we had a guy. There was a swimmer that was a year older than I had gotten a small scholarship to the University of Virginia, and we were taught that we needed to get a scholarship to swim somewhere. So went up there and checked it out and got a small offer, and so swimming was a big reason. And the other was I went up actually with my mother and toured a few schools, and there was just something about the heart of the school, the lawn that Jefferson designed, that was just fascinating to me. It really impacted me just as a place. That was a strong magnet. And I have some other architectural school friends who say the same thing, that when
Wow.
they visited it, it was just a powerful thing. It's a big lawn with the rotunda at the end, which Jefferson designed as the library, and it was modeled after the Pantheon in Rome. And then the school there's two wings, if you will, that flank this lawn with trees that are now huge and old and lovely. And the professors would live in pavilions and teach classes downstairs. And there's a colonnade that links all of those pavilions, they call them, together. And then the student rooms were off of the colonnades that linked the pavilions together. So it was all just a tight knit. And each pavilion was designed in a particular of manipulating the classical orders and arches and columns and porticos and that kind of thing. And it was really intended to be a way to instruct the people of the New World and how traditional Western classical architecture was to be manipulated. Jefferson was a big fan of Palladio, and he used the Four Books was a publication that had been around forever, and Jefferson's library became the Library of Congress. So he was well studied.
Wow.
And so, as we chatted a minute ago before we hit the record button, I'm proud of the fact that having gone to that school, I'm a part of his legacy, Jefferson's legacy, and I feel very much impacted by that. And when you think about it, this country has been around for a long time, but not that long. And he was, as they say, a founding father, and he brought a lot of knowledge and cultural enrichment to that school. And by going there, I felt like I was really a part of that. And that was a magnet that drew a professor of mine named Mario Valmarana, who had been working on the Watergate Hotel design and
wow.
construction, which was, I forget the architect's name, but he was an Italian architect, and Mario was a count who lived in Venice. And he was interested in Jefferson because of that Palladian connection. So he ended up getting a job teaching there, and I was one of many who took his classes and ended up attending a summer program that he started in Vicenza, right outside of Venice, where his summer home was the Villa Rotonda, Villa Capra, outside of Vicenza. And I'm going back for another reunion this next September for a big gala at that
With your fellow college students that you were
right.
with, correct?
There's a group of us. I think there'll be about 10 of us that'll go to that, just for my classmates. I'm proud of my classmates. We had some successful classmates, and
Right.
and they'll be there in attendance. Not all of them, but many. So again, it's nice to feel. If you think about it hard enough, everybody's connected, right? And
Right.
culturally, and so I enjoy that sort of historical connection, and the friends too.
Well, it's amazing that you have kept in touch and you're so close knit with. So why did you decide on architecture in general? Was that something you were interested in, or did it come
Yes.
after you got there?
No, I had gone to Episcopal High School here locally. I remember my parents gave me a choice between Bowles and Episcopal, and I liked the fact that Episcopal was new, and I liked the multicolored plastic chairs that they had in the lecture hall or in the cafeteria or whatever it was. And I remember there was a gymnasium that they had built that was a gymnasium and a auditorium and a dance hall and a whatever else. And I was interested in how that structure had multiple uses. And there was something about the fact that the school was new and the way it smelled and the site, I don't know. I was ready when I went to, one of my classmates was Newton Morgan. His father, Bill Morgan, was a famous local architect, and he
Right.
came and spoke to us one time, and I thought, oh, he seems like a cool guy. Architecture might be fun. And then there were some lecture courses. An art teacher gave a lecture about architecture, and I was just fascinated by it. I wrote some bad poetry in 8th grade and fancied myself sort of a artistic guy. And I was really encouraged by a teacher, John Merchant was his name, who later became the chaplain at Episcopal. He left, he was an English teacher, he left, went to seminary school, and came back and was a chaplain. And when I was at Virginia, I designed a chapel for Episcopal with him as my client, as my
Oh,
thesis
wow.
project. That kind of all wrapped up together, but it was architecture had an artistic component to it, which I was intrigued by, and sort of a mathematical component to it as well. I had taken well to math, and so I felt like it was a collection of things. I think the root word for religion is to gather together, and I felt like it was my religion. It gathered a lot of my interests into one thing, which I've continued to pursue, along with those friends that I described, that we all kind of got the bug. I have a friend, Jeff Bushman, who has an architectural firm, and in Charlottesville, he stayed, and he calls it a disease. Once you get the disease, there is no cure. So I'm definitely inflicted.
Well, you're very passionate, I know, and even the ocean, like the coastal construction line, I know that's been a big passion for you as well.
The
you're
passion
saving
is,
it, or
well, the coastal construction control line is what that has to do with is the legal components of building on the beach. There's a set of rules, laws that you have to comply with. And once you, like any set of rules, once you become familiar with them and a lot of other people aren't, it becomes a feather in your cap in terms of your ability and how to work within those limits. But the control line, it's intended to protect the dune system, and I don't know how effective it really is or will be when this climate change world that we live in. But it's been a part of doing something which I do feel passionate about, which is designing buildings. And on the ocean, there's just something, you're at the edge of a huge expanse of water, and there's just something magical. As you know, we swim in it in the morning. It's another world. And there's something exciting to me about the ocean. And building on the ocean is an exciting thing. You partake in this presence and you manipulate it and celebrate it in the way that you confront it and receive it, all of that. So, yeah, I love the ocean. And I love swimming past my houses. It's like a daily treat, you're swimming by and think, well, I did that one.
that's
And
awesome.
it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember back when I was getting ready to go away to school, and I wasn't necessarily sure that I was going to study architecture formally. I had an interest, but my primary job, so to speak, was swimming. And so, as I say, I transferred from swimming into architecture after 2 years at Virginia. I took some architecture classes along the way. But before I left town to go to school, I went to the beach by myself, just kind of soulfully thinking about what the hell I was going to get into. And I remember walking up and down the beach, actually in Ponte Vedra, I think, and looking at the houses and thinking, which one do I like? If I'm going to try to design buildings, I guess, I had friends that lived in the big cities, and they probably walked through Manhattan and thought about being an architect. But for me, I went to the beach and looked at the houses. So it's interesting, that's where I've ended up. A lot of them
So
ended up in the big cities, and I'm on the beach.
would you say you have a particular style, or do you do different types?
Well, it's true that some architects have a very specific style that they've mannered, manipulated, developed over time. And I have a little bit of that, but I feel very flexible and accommodating, wanting the client to really sort of set the tone of what they want. So I've done a lot of different kinds of work, projects, stylistically. But I will say that the classical component that comes from what I've described earlier in terms of having studied at UVA and in Italy, there's a passion that comes from that, just appreciating the depth of history and the way that those elements are interconnected and the stories that they tell. And to be able to brush upon that is an exciting thing. And the tools are more likely to end up as beautiful because of the way that they've been sort of developed over a long period of time. And I like the pretty thing. I want to do something that I think is beautiful, that my clients hopefully think is beautiful, and that the neighborhood thinks is beautiful. So I find beauty is something to long for and to try to participate in. I had an uncle who, my family from Tampa were there early on, like frontier, trading post kind of people, and they befriended a lot of the Seminole Indian folks. And one of my uncles was big into Native American stuff and actually had friends that were out west. And he talked about the word beauty, that the way they use it, they being the Native Americans, and how it includes a lot of things, not just an aesthetic appeal, but just the depth of wonderment and love and everything that's associated with being alive and engaging in nature and appreciating nature, living that way.
When you meet with someone, are they coming with a lot that you're looking at what's surrounding that lot or what the elevation of that? I mean, do you take the lot into consideration when you're designing
Sure.
something?
Yeah, it's the setting, and the sun and the wind and all of that they're when you're working on the ocean here, the east, ocean's always that way, and the best views are always that way. So there is certainly a similarity in that regard, but you're always paying attention to the views and the way the sun moves across the sky and where the winds come from and the different seasons. And you want to celebrate light in the way that a Gothic cathedral might celebrate light, but you want to be careful that the sun and the heat that it brings are manipulated properly in the summertime. And yes, every project's different, and it has to do, that comes from the client and their desires and their background and what they think is beautiful. And then I bring my own biases to the table in that regard, somewhat because of the history that I described, both personal and culturally. And then, so everything comes together. It's a big pot with a lot of ingredients. And,
so do they come to you? Do they come to you with like an idea of what they want, and then you're just fine tuning it?
It's to a degree. Oftentimes, what I tell people is, show me what you like, understanding that there's a lot of inconsistencies between this picture and that picture, but it's nice to have a picture. And if it's 20 pictures and they're all different, fine. But there'll be something that I might see that's a similarity, a theme, if you will, but in what the pictures are. And I might pick one that I think is particularly appealing to me in a way that seems to resonate more with more of what they talk about. Because again, it's the building is sort of a story that you tell, and it's a story that you relive as you walk through it, right? And it's sort of a person standing on the street with characteristics, and you want to, again, make that a beautiful person and a beautiful story, and in a way that's going to make their life more beautiful. Again, if you take a broad sense of what beauty can mean, because that's a passion of mine, is just to, everybody wants to make the world a little bit better. You do a good job of that, and this is my way of trying to do that a little bit on my own.
Well, having been in and out of so many of the oceanfront homes in Atlantic Beach in particular, and Neptune, it took me a while to realize the difference between a $10 million home and a $5 million home. The finishes, the quality, the detail. So in the process of, I'm assuming you get most of your work through referral, like people have used you.
Yes.
Do you get to choose the contractor? Do they choose the contractor? Do you get referrals from contractors?
It depends, right? And I think because I worked at Haskell for a good many years, and it was a contractor-led design build firm, I was, my orientation, my way of dealing with the contractor is more of a teammate than maybe a lot of architects. I've done a lot of, I've designed houses for contractors to live in. There have been some of my clients, and I have good friends that are contractors, and if I have the opportunity to recommend them, then I will. And sometimes they recommend me. But yes, you're right, it's all word of mouth. And that feels good. And one of the benefits of being old as hell is that you have a lot of contacts, and you have some history with people that want to work with you. And I feel blessed to have a continuing series of opportunities in that regard. Yeah, you want to work with people that you trust, and people that are in some ways after the same things you are, which is a quality of appearance, workmanship, and what's hidden behind the walls. You want it to hold up well. You don't want any problems down the road. And if you sense that somebody's trying to cut corners and build in a future problem, then that's not a good situation. You don't want to work with those folks. It's all about just trying to be the good guy, right? And help people. It's like when you try to sell a house, everybody wants to make a living and make money, but at the end of the day, you're just trying to help people out, right?
Yeah, I definitely
and
feel,
build the community. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel service oriented, and I think after being a property manager for 18 years, I have a lot of resources to help me when I need advice. If I'm working with a buyer and there's some repairs, I can call someone and say, how much is this going to cost? Or some of it I know just because I've been through the renovation process with commercial and residential.
Yeah, I think your job description is the biggest one I've ever known. I mean, there's nothing Kendra doesn't know how to do, it seems to me.
And if I don't know how to do it, I know who can, and I will connect you.
That's the secret. Yeah. And that's a talent. And you know, because you're a nice person and everybody's your friend, and so everybody, it's not, people aren't going to look on the caller ID and say, "Oh no, it's Kendra." You know, that's not going to happen. So
Thank you. All right. So one other thing just about building in general. So in Jacksonville, we have a lot of new construction. We have all the different builders building neighborhoods and that kind of thing. So does then anyone ever come to you with a plan and say, can I just do this? Or,
sometimes I've had people that have tried to design their own thing, and they'll show me a magazine, and it, my role can change drastically depending upon what people want me to do.
right.
Generally speaking, when someone has a very specific idea of what they think it ought to be, then I'm probably not as good of a fit because I don't want to be a draftsman for them.
Okay.
I want to be able to improve it in a way that makes sense to me. And that doesn't say that what they're doing is wrong. It's just that I don't feel like, in terms of the value that I bring to the project, I don't know that I'm able to apply it as effectively and be worth my fee as much.
Right. Well, you mentioned earlier in another conversation about just technology and how those plans are a lot more available than they were in the
Right.
past.
It's amazing. You know, when I started in this business, and I joke about being old, but I'm not that old, but we all drove,
If you swim a mile or two in the ocean, you're not that old, Jimmy.
you know, you age in different ways, right? But everything was pencil and paper. There was a great story a friend of mine had when I worked for a guy named Emilio Zeller, and there was a guy, I can't remember his name, Bill Chikagan was his name. And he talked about how living in Jacksonville, working as an architect, that you would have this vellum paper that and a pencil you would drag across it, and a linen cloth that had a little square hole cut in it. And so you would draw where the square hole was, because without air conditioning, you were sweating so much that you had to have something to absorb the sweat, or the sweat would destroy the paper that you were drawing on.
Oh my.
And so now we've progressed from that to, I have 5 computer screens I'm looking at right now. And so the way that I can develop work has vastly changed and expanded. I feel like I do what a office of 4 people used to do. And it's good news, bad news. I get to be my own boss and do all the work myself, but I don't have that team that used to be fun to have around. There's plenty of people with plenty of teams, but I feel like I've been retired for 20 years working on my own as a hobby. But one of the other things I mentioned is that the quality of the off-the-shelf builder projects, I believe, has improved significantly since the time when I started all of this. Because you used to be able to look at a house that was an architect's house next door to a house that was a builder house, and the builder house looked pretty bad, and the architect house either looked a lot better or significantly worse because the architect was trying new stuff. You know, so I feel like architects do the best and the worst houses because if they're being experimental in ways that they're not necessarily good at, then you can end up with a real unattractive building, which, people, you get on a limb and you can't go back and you just got to finish it. You know? But I try not to do that.
Well, there is a building in Atlantic Beach that got shut down. You probably pass it on your bike ride. The one by Bull Park.
Oh yeah. I don't know what happened with that. Do you know?
I think it was either argument between contractor and city, or they didn't do something right. But it sat empty and open for so long. Then they finally
Right.
boarded it up. But it was open to the air for so long. I'm sure it's just damaged.
I've seen projects like that over the years where people get in a fight and you can just see the fight ongoing. And it becomes a derelict building. Sometimes you have to tear it down and start over. And we've got the Laura Street Trio downtown. Like, what the hell are they going to do with all of that? Right.
Well, so when you're working with a client, Are you cognizant of cost, or is that more the contractor?
You mentioned something before about telling the difference between a $5 million house and a $1 million house. And that's one of the hardest things to understand in the beginning of my work is where is this headed? Because again, I flip really big pancakes. So I'm trying to help the people. I'm cooking something up for them. And you don't know at the beginning how far to take it in terms of trying to be inventive, how much detail that you're going to put into it, and cost. So you do try to interpret that relatively early and establish a direction. And sometimes the cost just comes in the level of finishes, and which marble they buy from Portugal or whatever. But it can also be in not just the size, but the way, the complexity of the way things are put together. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to sort of underperform in that regard. You not push it to, again, beauty is the goal, right? And beauty can be very simple, but beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So the beholder tells you what they think is beautiful, and you try to kind of hit that mark. But the cost, you have a sense of it, and that sense became really complicated during the pandemic, right? Okay. I had one house that we all thought was going to be $1 million, and it turned out to be 2 point something, and so it never happened. And that was because of the pandemic, right?
Oh, the supply wasn't there?
Yeah, the cost just went through the roof, right? The roof never became a roof. So, yeah, it's hard to hit that mark. And I watch a lot of contractors be caught in the same dilemma, some of which you know well.
Right.
But it's hard. It's like throwing a football to somebody that's running. If they all of a sudden slow down or speed up, it's hard to throw it properly. So it's hard to know where you're headed all the time. But a lot of what I try to do is to come up with a core idea that I believe is worth fighting for in terms of the way the rooms are organized, and then it can become more or less elaborate and more or less expensive, but that core is maintained. And the project will be better generally if they spend more money, not always, right? Sometimes I've had a couple of projects where the level of finishes just began to feel over the top to me. Like it was fine before, but that's rare. Usually you spend more money, it's a nicer thing.
Do you do many renovations, or are you strictly new build?
I do renovations too, and I've done several of them on the ocean as well. And the renovation it's a different kind of challenge because you have to understand. I'm working on an oceanfront renovation right now. Just sent off something right before you called. And you have to understand what the original intentions of the original architect or builder were and respect that core that they created, and then manipulate it and change it in a way that makes it better. Some of that's just a time thing, like the age that we live in. Mm-hmm. I talk about how when I first started in this, the kitchen had a operable window to the living area, right? Now, before the operable window, or with shutters or whatnot, you had a completely separate kitchen, right? Maybe before that it was in the backyard because fire was a hazard. And then the window kind of went away, and then you had more or less wall, and now the kitchen, there's no barrier between the kitchen and the living area.
Right.
So there's a cultural progression or change or development, evolution, whatever the word, that we all participate in, right? And so when you're doing a renovation, you're in some ways updating what was there. And like we talked about before, the images that are so, omnipresent everywhere now, the sense of what's popular or correct from a real estate value perspective it's a different game than it used to be, because people are a lot more aware, and maybe the fads are more, I don't know if they're consolidated because there's so many options out there, but I'm sure you deal with that, right? I mean,
Yeah, you can see looking at a house just by the tile choices what year it was built, you know.
And that's one thing that I'm nervous about right now. When I started, and I still do a lot of white windows, but black windows are the thing, right? And so you put them in and you go, well, 10 years from now, what is that? You become dated. But that's
Right.
okay. I remember when I was in school, we went from the postmodernism was a sort of an ugly period in architectural fad, whatever the word is. But color went from primary colors in black and white in like the 20s and 30s, whatever. Mid-century modern was big, but the color scheme that was kind of hot when I was in college was seemed new. I was like, wow, we've discovered these colors. And then you go look back 50 years earlier and the colors were hot back then. It's just like clothing. It evolves, but it cycles back around. So
Right.
the thing that you think is like, oh my God, this has never been done before, and nothing new under the sun, right? But there is a progression. And some of that's technological in terms of the way that engineering works and the materials and the way things can span and hold up. I mean, now you can virtually glue a big piece of stone to a wall and it'll stay there.
But also even the flooring has changed, you know.
Right,
It used to be only wood, and now there's all these wood alternatives that are looking really good and they're
right.
durable.
Yeah, right. And we were just involved in that renovation, and that flooring turned out great. It looks really nice. I remember back when I worked at Haskell, I think it was Armstrong or somebody offered a trip to Manhattan to go look at their big showroom, and none of the upper level architects or contractors wanted to go. So I go to Manhattan on this private plane, to go see this artificial man-made flooring that Armstrong had come up with. They were promoting, and it looked okay, but it didn't look that great. But I went to the Yankees game and the jazz club and all that, but I didn't like the floor. But now that stuff's nice,
Right.
you know, not just theirs, but a lot of it out there. So yeah, I've been involved before, and you have to be cautious as an architect in terms of people that present a new product as the best thing since sliced bread, because it isn't always that way.
Right.
The elements have a way of being tough on things in ways that the lab doesn't necessarily anticipate. And so you can really get in trouble promoting something that's untested. And that sort of is an obstacle in the development of things, maybe, because people are overly cautious. But still, I'm engaged in this as an art form primarily, and as a service to clients, but there's a legal aspect of not wanting to jeopardize somebody's investment and then be called accountable for it. I don't want any of that kind of trouble. So
Well,
yeah,
I think that hit me when I went to Paris for the first time, and these buildings have been there forever, and yet I'm living on
right.
a barrier island that's tearing down a house that was built in the 50s. And it's like,
Yeah, I know.
where, where do you, yeah,
I remember I had a friend who went to a boarding school in the Northeast, and she was home for spring break, and she had brought this group of girls. She was a girl home to her house in Jacksonville, and she was so excited she was going to take them to see St. Augustine. It was a real tourist attraction, and I've forgotten when St. Augustine was founded, but my friend was describing to her friend that lived in London how old, oh my God, old St. Augustine was. And she says, well, that's nice, but my house is older than that.
wanting to,
Well, as I just said, when I was swimming this morning out in the ocean, thinking about what we might talk about, and one of the things that you had mentioned before was the storytelling that I had done when I was a young father, young kids, two boys, and how it connected my work to my way of being a parent and my thinking about the world that they were going to inherit and be a part of. And when I was designing those retirement communities, they were relatively big scale things. And I would go to a beautiful hillside in Northern Virginia or this lovely field on the edge of a dry creek bed with a rise of mountains that were in the distance in Northern California. And it was just a fantastic place. I would see the little animals running around or whatever. And then the bulldozers would come in and things would be plowed and cut and transformed to make the thing that I was dreaming of real. And so it was a mixed bag of emotions because I felt excited and energized and privileged to be able to imprint this place with what was in my head. But I felt horrible about the devastation that I was inflicting on this natural setting. And so when I would come home from doing that work, and I had the young boys, and we would read them stories before they went to bed, and oftentimes my eyes were tired, I was tired, I didn't want to read a story. So I would tell a story instead. And sometimes the stories were about the things that I was dealing with in my professional work.
Oh,
I developed a protagonist, Frisky the Wonder Cat, which was a corny phrase that came up, but I stuck with it throughout the whole thing because we told a lot of stories about Frisky, and Frisky would often be the champion of the rabbits in the field or the trees or whatever. So it was a way of me kind of feeling better or getting things out of my system to talk about the other side of that coin. And,
right.
my kids, they loved it. And my dad was a storyteller. So I feel like I inherited that from him. But when we would go to, there's a state park that you know about
The
nearby,
Goldhead, yeah.
Goldhead, yeah. And they're little cabins that we would rent as a Waldorf group, right? And I would tell stories, and I would be, you know, I was a star, which I enjoyed because my kids, I would tell them stories and then all the other kids stories. And, there's something that magical about a fire in the darkness, right? And the way that you can sort of weave a story together. And I would make them up as we went along. But Frisky was often the protagonist, and we dealt with a lot of that same kind of thing. Just how to be sensitive to and champion the natural world. And
Right.
that is a part of what I do is to me, you're spending nature in terms of the site that you occupy and the building components that you put in place. And you need to be respectful and mindful of the cost of all of that. And, we are inflicting our will on the world in a way that isn't always positive. And so there's an obligation to me to be as sensitive and as heartfelt as you can to do as good of a job as you can, just out of respect for the impact that you're having. And like we said before, I mean, I know that there's a lot of gloom and doom potentially on the horizon, but the joy of living is important. You ought to enjoy it, right? But because of what you're consuming in the process. So let's celebrate it and be thankful.
Well, you also had the painting. You paint as well, because I have one of your watercolors, and that
Oh
was
yeah.
another outlet for you too, right? In a
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was
stressful
part of the
time.
education was to draw and then put a little color wash on it and you do feel again more engaged. I heard an interesting fact that now that kids are typing more than they're writing, they learn differently. There's something about writing something down that it registers more in your brain and you remember it more effectively. And I think when you're sitting on the hard concrete and you're drawing something, there's a level of engagement and an understanding that comes from that and it's different. And like I was at Goldhead last week,
I
right?
know you guys are
Yeah,
still doing that. Like, was there a time that
yeah,
you
and
didn't do it, or?
well, and my eyes have changed. I don't do the watercolor as much. It takes more time, but I did some sketching, and again, it's like it's a level of participation in the world that's just more heartfelt. I'll use that word. It's just like swimming in the ocean. I mean, there's a ton of people that walk by the ocean and they feel like, oh, I'm at the ocean. Well, get in there and swim a mile or two, and then you really appreciate it. I love, I don't know if you do this, but whenever a pelican flies by, I'll roll over on my back and say hello to the pelican. And you just feel like you're one of the guys out there, one of the gang. And it's an incredible feeling, and it's right there. But it's Corbusier, a famous architect, used to say a lot of people have eyes that do not see. And it's nice to see and to appreciate what you're looking at and to feel really more engaged and more responsible for what you participate in. So
Yeah,
it's
I
a good way of
definitely.
living. I enjoy it.
Yeah, I think, I swim earlier than you do. I swim at sunrise.
Which I
And
admire, by the way. I don't know if I could do that.
well, I know you work later than I do, so
I
my
do,
circadian
yeah.
rhythm is a little different. I, go to bed earlier, get up earlier. But yeah, the sunrise is different every day. The ocean is different every day. Yeah, it's just such a great way to start. I just feel like I'm just winning my morning.
Yeah.
I wish I had done it sooner. I actually, and do you remember that we lived on Laura Street together years ago? It was like you and
I
Michelle,
remember,
Jennifer and
yeah, yeah.
Doug.
I honestly don't remember that you lived there, but I remember living there, and I remember seeing you all the time, but I didn't
Yeah,
know that
that
you
was the
lived there.
first time I actually, Lance and I used to swim like from Laura to the Sea Turtle.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, but he was a sprinter, so he would go fast, and I'd be like, "Don't get too far ahead." And I'm much more confident, in the ocean
Yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
So
awesome. I didn't know that. No,
yeah.
I didn't swim back then. I was a pool guy back then. But swimming at BAC for all those years, the chlorine, I think I've maxed out my chlorine intake.
Oh,
I can't do it anymore. My
I am.
lungs or my skin. I don't.
I am in total agreement. Yes, I cannot do the
Yeah.
chlorine. Even if I did the chlorine, it's the smelling like chlorine all day. Just
Yes. I
having the
hate it.
smell. Yeah.
I know. I see friends that I used to swim with, and they go, "We miss you. When are you coming back?" And I like, I don't know, man. I don't think it's gonna happen. And for a while it was, oh well, when it really gets cold, or when the storms come, or well, he'll be back. I said, no.
Well, I have gotten better with the big waves. I'm a lot more confident, and I don't know if I told you, like a couple months ago, I actually got held under, like for the first time.
No.
I saw it coming and I took a deep breath to dive under it, but I didn't stay under long enough, so it caught
Uh-huh.
me. And one of the girls I swam with, Jessica, she was close to me, like we were kind of swimming the same pace. And I was in it like, okay, when is this thing gonna pop me out? I'm like holding my breath, and I didn't panic, but I popped up like right next to her, and she's like, I was like, ah, where is she? Why didn't she come up? But since then, I have been able to get out a lot easier because now I know that was what was happening. Even like just trying to get out past the waves, that was always the challenge. And if I couldn't get out,
Right.
that was my gauge of I just got to swim on the inside or I don't swim.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
so yeah, I've done better
Yeah.
in the
It's
big
it,
waves.
and right when you think you're out far enough or you've got it handled, and you don't pay attention, you get slammed. So it's always, you're and coming in, you think, oh, I've done my swim, you come in, oh, it's over, and then
Wave
that
hits you.
shore break, it can get you, man. Yeah, you got to be careful,
Yeah,
but it's a good thing. Yeah, it's a
yeah,
good thing.
yeah. It's fun.
So yeah, back to what we were saying before in terms of the appreciating the evolution of the culture and the continuity of it. And I feel good about the fact that when I design a house, I'm thinking about Renaissance Italian villas or houses that were built in the 20s or caves that people occupied long before that. And I am nervous about what climate change will do to the ocean front. where we live. I tease amongst friends that I'm designing houses for fish. But I also, believe that we can't not do things. Like I'll say this, I'll tell you this story. I went to a convention, AIA convention, and attended classes as you do, continuing education. And there was a man that was really into sea level rise. And he gave a talk, and I was impacted, and I came back and I had an opportunity to design an oceanfront house, and I talked to people out of it.
I do remember you
Yeah, and that was, and after and I don't know if I really talked them out of it, but I certainly talked them out of using me. It was very effective in that regard. So after a while, this is how concerned and frightened I was by this whole prospect, which I, to some degree, still am. But I said, this ain't going to work. I can't continue to support myself and fly away clients. But I do believe that we're all in this together. Life is awesome, wonderful, and you do what you can. And my life's circumstances and my opportunities and abilities have come together in a way that I'm able to do something that I love doing. And I feel like I'm good enough at it to where I'm not being dishonest when I tell people I'm going to help them.
Right.
And I feel like I have helped people, and I'm proud of it. So yeah, it's all good.
You have a great reputation, even looking at your website, all the different houses.
Yeah, like I say, getting older has some advantages. You accumulate things. I'm a hoarder in a way, but it's been fun. And I do think that it's like anything else. You have to work hard to become good at it. And I think the adage of architecture being an old man's profession or an old woman's profession, I think is somewhat true. Things do change all the time, and I've forgotten a lot, but I know some stuff. So I'm hopeful that the next house will be the best one I've ever done. That's the goal.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that you would want to share just about yourself or about architecture, about the community?
I don't know. I think it does come down to beauty and respect. And when you talked about this whole sense of community, and I made a comment that I feel like I set the stage more than I'm a player, because I do kind of get caught up in the artifact, the thing that isn't alive. It's the place, it's the stage where life kind of plays out. But I appreciate being involved in this as an exercise or a conversation. And I praise you for being a better part of the community, really, than I am in terms of being able to engage in a lot of people in different ways and knitting things together in a way that makes the community better for everybody. So God bless you, and I appreciate you. And I'm happy to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Find the Connection. I hope today's episode gave you some helpful insights and inspired you to get involved in your community. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps others find us. And if you're interested in making a move or learning more about Northeast Florida, reach out to me anytime. Let's keep finding the connection together. Until next time, stay connected and keep thriving.